My Lords. Before I go further, may I declare that I am a long leaseholder in a property which is my home, and that I have no other property interests apart from as a will trustee in one flat in London where I have no beneficial interest, simply a nominal interest on behalf of the beneficiary of the will during his lifetime. I rise to respond in particular to Amendments 55 and 58 amongst the government amendments because they address a point that I have raised. I'm slightly surprised my noble friend on the front bench didn't seek to draw my attention to this fact, a point that I raised in committee and on which I have a related amendment later in the list, which we will no doubt come to. But if I address it now, I can be briefer when we come to that group later on. The matter relates in particular to the question I raised in committee about the ability of landlords to recover legal costs from the service charge. In particular, I asked the question how this would work for right-to-manage companies, and I should have declared also, incidentally, that in the block where I live, we have a right-to-manage company, and I am both a member and a director of that company. How this ban would relate to right-to-manage companies who have no other source of income apart from the service charge. What the bill, before these amendments were brought forward, what the bill would have done would have made it virtually impossible for a right-to-manage company to bring legal action against, for example, a defaulter or someone who failed to pay because they would have no assurance in advance that they would be able to recover their legal costs. And so they would be exposed, the directors would be exposed, to having to pay the legal costs out of their own pocket, quite apart from the fact that in most lawyers like a little bit of money up front anyway in order to commence proceedings. So that would need to be funded from the private pocket of the directors of the company. Now, my amendment later it raises this question also in relation to other types of non-profit landlord or landlords who have no financial interest, or rather managers, building managers, who have no financial interest in the building other than their role as manager. The government's response, and here I think I'm making the speech that I was expecting my noble friend to make in relation to these two amendments, the government's response appears to be saying that the Secretary of State will make regulations subject to the affirmative procedure to provide for circumstances where the new proposed regime on litigation costs and administration charges will not apply or is suspended. So this does appear to me to be something of a concession in the direction of the point that I raised in committee and have on the order paper later. But the drafting and explanatory notes provide no guidance on when such regulations will be made or what the intention is behind such exemptions. And it's worth saying here that the amendments provide that the circumstances on which the exceptions may be based include not only the litigation costs, but also the relevant proceedings and the landlord of a specified description. Now, as I say, this could be beneficial for freeholders in the circumstances which I describe, but it depends very much on the content of the regulations. The questions I'd like to ask my noble friend, and we are in the very strange position that, of course, I'm asking him to give a commitment when, subject to the will of the electorate, he may not be a member of the government, and the party on which the government on behalf of which he speaks may not be in power. I say nothing to anticipate what that result might be, but of course the electorate may choose a government of a different party. but I'm nonetheless going to ask him these questions. And in some ways, I'd be very grateful if the noble Lord Kennedy of Southwark might find it possible to give his own answer to these questions. So the question is, what type of litigation costs or proceedings or landlords does the government intend to be accepted from the general rule? I'm sorry, I'm trying to. Normally I'm better prepared, but of course very few of us are well prepared for dealing with this bill because it's been added so late to the agenda. I suspect my noble friend is in that category, on the front bench is in that category as well, from the turn of the head I noticed on his part just now. Whether these exceptions could also extend to certain categories of leaseholders, for example, investor leaseholders who might benefit from the general rule, and crucially, within what time frame such regulations would be made, because there is no commitment, of course, to time frame in the amendments that have been made. The difficulty is that directors of right to manage companies and others are being left in a sort of limbo between the passing of this bill and the coming into effect of the regulations. It is also possible, one must bear in mind, that directors of right to manage companies and similar landlords may themselves be the subject of legal action, and their ability to recover their own legal costs in defending such actions is also a question that needs to be resolved, and clearly resolved, if people are, like myself, are going to continue as directors of right to manage companies, potentially finding themselves exposed to that sort of risk. So as far as these two amendments go, I welcome the general direction. I find it deeply unsatisfactory that we're having to rely on the promise of a Secretary of State who may not be in office in 6 weeks' time. I would prefer my own approach later on the order paper of putting these provisions onto the face of the bill, but I would seek a very clear response from my noble friends, so that the many people in this country who have pursued right to manage, a policy which the government supports and wishes to extend, and which I wholly support them in wishing to extend, but that those people who have pursued right to manage are not left adrift by ill-thought-out drafting in this bill.